They built 96 houses on my land, not by accident, but on purpose, and I inherited 47 acres in Colorado from my grandfather land that was paid off and pristine. And when I finally went to visit the property for the first time in 3 years, I found an entire subdivision standing where my forest used to be, with paved roads and street lights and families unloading furniture into houses they had each paid almost $500,000 for, and the HOA president, a woman who had clearly never worked an honest day in her life, but wore a Rolex like it was a sheriff's badge, told me to my face that I was nothing more than a deadbeat squatter trying to scam hardworking families. And she said her lawyer had already confirmed the land was abandoned, and therefore belonged to them through adverse possession. And she bragged that she had already deposited $16 million in pre-sales. And I remember standing there stunned and angry, and instead of confronting her, I did absolutely nothing except leave and watch them finish their construction, because my gut told me they were hanging themselves with every nail gun pop and every gallon of beige HOA-mandated paint they spread across what used to be my pine forest. And when they landscaped and installed pools and finished driveways, I gathered everything my grandfather had left me, including the original 1971 deed and all 47 annual property tax receipts, and I walked into federal court with those documents. And the strength of my grandfather's words in my head, "Don't let the bastards take what's yours," and I asked myself what anyone else would do if someone built an entire neighborhood on their property. And I wanted to know what state my land rights family is watching from, because my name is Dakota Flint like the stone, and I am 47 years old. A structural engineer divorced driving a 2008 Silverado that burns a quart of oil every month, and nothing special about me except one thing: my grandfather left me those 47 acres of Colorado forest, worth more than $4 million, and William Flint, who had bought that land for $8,200 cash in 1971, was a Depression-era man who saved every receipt in ledgers that smelled like pipe tobacco and WD-40. And when he died in 2019, he left me the property and one note tucked inside the deed that read, "Don't let the bastards take what's yours," and I had not visited for 3 years. Because of divorce and 2 kids in college and 70-hour work weeks, but I always paid the $6,400 in property taxes each April, never late, always online with the email receipts to prove it. And in August 2022, when I finally drove up to scatter my grandfather's ashes, I turned off Highway 36 onto the old fire road, and my stomach dropped because the pine forest was gone, and in its place were 96 Mediterranean-style stucco houses with fake balconies and cookie-cutter yards behind a carved stone sign that read Ridgeline Heights, a Whitmore luxury community. And I checked my GPS coordinates 4 times because I could not believe what I was seeing, and a guard at the gate told me residence. Only when I explained that I owned the property and showed him a photo of the deed, he laughed and said, "Sure, buddy, and I'm Elon Musk." And then a white Range Rover pulled up, and out stepped Cassandra Whitmore in her 50s, Botoxed into a permanent look of mild surprise, wearing linen clothes that cost more than my truck payment, and she radiated that energy of someone who had never once been told no. And she dismissed me at a glance, judging my work boots and jacket and calloused hands, and she assumed I was a poor construction worker, and even offered to take my number for labor jobs. And when I said I was the legal owner of the land, she laughed again and said her title company had run a forensic search and found that my land was abandoned for 3 years, which she claimed gave her adverse possession rights. And when I corrected her and told her that taxes negate any such claim, her smile sharpened, and she called it adorable, and then handed me her attorney's business card with 2 fingers like it was contaminated, and informed me that all 96 houses had already been sold in pre-sales worth $16 million, and that if I kept trespassing, she would personally call the sheriff, who she bragged owed her favors since they donated heavily to his department. And then she snapped a photo of my license plate like I was a criminal and leaned in close to say, "Trust me, honey, people like you don't win against people like us." And I left that night with my hands shaking, and I spread my grandfather's documents across my kitchen table, from deed to maps to receipts. And I realized she had threatened me, photographed my truck, and implied I was a scammer. But what she had really done was give me everything I needed to bury her. So the next morning I called her attorney, and his receptionist, with her polished dentist office voice, offered me a nuisance settlement of $15,000 if I signed a quitclaim deed by Friday, which was laughable, because that deed would mean I surrendered all rights forever to $4 million in property. And I hung up after saying, "Tell him I'll see him in court." And then I knew I needed a real lawyer, not the cheap one who handled my divorce. And my buddy Marcus referred me to Lydia Chen, who once destroyed a railroad company in an adverse possession battle so thoroughly they tried to hire her just to get her to stop suing them. And when I met her, she smelled of leather and lemon polish. And she listened silently, taking notes, until I gave her every single tax receipt since 1971. And when she saw them, she explained calmly that adverse possession in Colorado requires 18 years of continuous hostile possession and tax payments by the squatter, and that since I had paid taxes the entire time, their claim was dead on arrival. And she said she could get an injunction right away, but then she smiled faintly and explained why it was better to let them finish building. Because if I stopped construction now, it would bankrupt the development and tie my land up in years of litigation against 96 families, suing everyone. But if I let them finish, then I could file for declaratory judgment and own all the completed houses outright, while proving Whitmore had committed fraud. And she said it was cold and brutal, but it was the smartest. And though it would cost me $40,000 to $50,000 in legal fees, we would recover everything with damages when we won, and I told her I barely had $12,000, and a truck that needed a transmission and kids in school. But I signed the retainer anyway because my grandfather's note echoed in my head, and Lydia warned me to keep quiet because in property law, surprise was worth more than gold. So I watched them continue week after week, documenting every nail, every trench, every family moving. And I took time-stamped photos, and when Cassandra noticed me, she called the sheriff, who a young deputy, to threaten me with harassment charges, though I was parked on public roads. And when Thanksgiving came, I watched families carry cribs and plant trees in my yards. And it broke me because they were not villains, they were victims who thought they had bought the American dream. But Cassandra was about to learn that theft costs more than money, and by December, she escalated by filing false code enforcement complaints, saying I was dumping waste on my own property. But when the inspector saw nothing, he privately admitted Whitmore had a pattern of harassing neighbors to grease the wheels for development, and he gave me his card for when I needed a witness. And by Christmas, most of the houses were occupied, and I had a January court date. And then Cassandra launched a smear campaign, posting on Facebook that I was a stalker taking pictures of children, and she tagged my truck and license plate, and hundreds of people shared it, calling me a predator. And my daughter Emma messaged me in tears asking if I had been arrested, and my son called terrified, and I wanted to scream online. But Lydia told me not to engage because every comment was evidence of malice. And instead I documented the shares and hashtags calling for my head. And I watched as my boss suspended me from work because a school district client was nervous about optics. And I walked out of my office watching coworkers avoid eye contact like I was radioactive. And Cassandra had not just attacked my land claim, but my entire existence. Refused to give in because my grandfather had written those words, "Don't let the bastards take what's yours." And so I stayed the course and filed for emergency motions for restraining orders and defamation claims. And every time Cassandra or her husband Preston or their company tried to smear me or bury me in bureaucracy or paint me as a monster, they only stacked the evidence higher for the day I would stand in front of a judge with the deed in my hand and prove that I was the rightful owner not only of 47 acres, but of every one of those 96 houses built by thieves who thought power and money put them above the law. And I knew then that I would not just reclaim my land, I would bury the Whitmores and their empire the way they tried to bury me.